Okay. Dear participants, we would like to start and continue the afternoon session of our workshop, and let us jump immediately to the presentation on IDI, the ICT Development Index, which will be done by my colleague Martin Schaper, Senior ICT Analyst. So please.
Okay, click. Thank you, Fadi. Good afternoon, everybody. It's me again. Talk about the IDI. We all know the ICT Development Index always attracts a lot of attention from many countries and policymakers. I want to guide you a little bit through the IDI from beginning to end. So what's the background, what is it, what are the indicators, data availability, and also the reason for not publishing the IDI last year.
No, it's another button. Down. Down. Yeah.
This morning I had them this way around this morning. Okay, I found the right button. So the IDI, it's a composite index, multiple indicators combined into a single index, measuring a multidimensional concept which cannot be captured by a single indicator. So they're becoming very popular. There's many of those indicators going around: the Human Development Index, the Global Innovation Index, the E-Government Development Index, etc., etc. The Arab Knowledge Index is another recent development. So there are quite a few. There's advantages and disadvantages of putting everything together in one number. The advantage is that you can summarize complex multidimensional realities into a single value, and that I think is the main advantage, is you can communicate it very easily to the public. That's why these indices attract so much attention, because you come up with one number and a country says, okay, we are number 1, 5, 12, whatever, but there's one number attached to it. And if you say, we looked at 12 indicators and country X is doing very well on indicators 1, 3, 5, and 7, but not so good on 2, 4, and 6, whereas country Z is better in this indicator, but not so good in that indicator. That's not a communication story that is easy to do. So those are advantages. Disadvantages is that you can easily misinterpret it and misuse it, and especially it can disguise serious failings, not necessarily serious failings, but it can disguise problems in a certain area. If you're doing very well in other areas, you have an overall score which may be very good, but there are underlying problems which you don't see. And then, of course, the big question is, what do you put in the index? And that has a big impact on what comes out of the index, and that can be subject to political dispute. So how do you construct an index? There's a handbook on constructing composite indicators developed by the Joint Research Center of the EU and the OECD together. It recommends 10 steps, and that's also the approach that we have followed. You start with your theoretical framework, you go to data selection, you impute missing data, you do your multivariate analysis to see if you have a stable, balanced index. You normalize your indicators, then you do your weighting and your aggregation. You look at the uncertainty and sensitivity analysis. So if we make small changes to some of the indicators, are there big jumps in rankings and results or not? Are some of the indicators or some of the results very strongly correlated to a certain aspect, and is that something that is intended or not? You go back to the data to correct the issues or to change your selection or your weighting or whatever. You compare it with other indicators, and finally you visualize the results. There we go, the Joint Research Center, I mentioned them. So for the IDI, the ICT Development Index, our conceptual framework is that there are three stages in the evolution towards an information society. We start with the basics, infrastructure and access, which we call readiness. Once the basics are in place, people start using ICTs, the intensity phase. And once people start using it, eventually what will come out are outcomes, which we can call ICT impact. Now, to have an effective use and have good outcomes, people need the skills to use ICTs. Well, there are no good direct ICT impact indicators, so that's why we, in the IDI, we only look at the three ones within the oval there. We look at readiness, use, and skills. So we have three sub-indices. The IDI is a composite index that combines 14 indicators now, designed to be global, reflecting changes taking place in countries of different levels of development. It was developed by the ITU in 2008 upon the request of member states to establish such an index. The first time we reported the results was in Measuring the Information Society Report 2009. The objectives are to measure the level and evolution over time of ICT developments in countries and the experience of those countries relative to other countries, to look at progress in ICT development in both developed and developing countries, to study the digital divides. So what is the difference between countries in terms of the levels of ICT development and the development potential of ICTs and the extent to which countries can make use of them to enhance growth and development. In 2017, there was an extraordinary meeting of ACTI-EGH to look at the results of a subgroup that was charged with proposing new indicators. The meeting was open to all ITU members and experts in the field of ICT statistics and data collection, and the objective was to discuss, debate, and agree on a revised set of indicators. 2 documents were prepared by the subgroup and an independent group of experts. The outcome of the meeting, after very long and intense debates and many compromises that were made, was a total of 14 indicators to be included in the IDI compared to the previous list of 11. There's a link here to the meeting where you can read up if you're interested. So, comparing with the previous IDI, there were 3 indicators that were dropped in 2017 and to be implemented in the IDI 2018. Fixed telephone subscriptions per 100 inhabitants, mobile cellular telephone subscriptions per 100 inhabitants, and fixed broadband subscriptions per 100 inhabitants. Those 3 were dropped, but a number were added. So the fixed broadband penetration rate was dropped, and what we got instead was fixed broadband subscriptions by speed tiers. Low speed, 256 kilobits to 2 megabits, 2 to 10 megabits, and more than 10 megabits. It wasn't really expressed how this should be interpreted within the IDI. This is something that we did later. Then we have the population covered by 3G mobile networks, and then split in 2 sub-indicators, at least 3G and at least LTE, what people generally call 4G. In the use sub-index, there were 2 traffic indicators added: mobile broadband traffic per subscription, not per inhabitant, but per subscription. That was also a very specific choice of the extraordinary meeting. The same indicator, but for fixed broadband internet traffic. And I think we will see later that those are not easy to collect. And mobile phone ownership. This is an SDG indicator that was also added to the use sub-index. Then in the skills sub-index, in addition to the 3 indicators that were there already, the 4th indicator that was added was individuals with ICT skills, coming from a household survey with 9 activities, increasingly more complex. And that's generally collected through a household survey. So There are three data sources. There's the telecommunication data, the supply side indicators as we know them, usually collected by the regulator from operators, and we collect them from the member states through the WTI questionnaire. Then we have household and individual ICT data, usually collected by the National Statistics Office, sometimes in partnership with other organizations, through a household survey. And we collect the data through the household questionnaire. And then there are three education data which are still in the IDI, usually collected by the Ministry of Education. The international data collection is done by UNESCO, the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, and we as ITU don't collect the data from countries, but we take them from the UIS database, or we request the data. So putting the two together, here are the 14 indicators, where you can see 5 indicators in the access poll, 2 coming from household survey, 3 coming from WTI questionnaire, 5 indicators in the use sub-index, 2 of them coming from household survey, 3 coming from the WTI questionnaire, and 4 skills indicators, the 3 old one from UIS and 1 new one collected through a household indicators, household survey. Then we have the aggregation methodology. We decided to keep that the same as previously, and this was also presented to ACT-EGH last year, who agreed with this, meaning that within a sub-index all indicators have the same weight, and the 3 sub-indices have weights of 40%, 40%, and 20%. Some people asked us, or some countries asked us, why don't you do also equal weights between the 3 sub-indices? That's because the skills sub-index is still not fully mature. There are still 3 proxy indicators in there, and the new one, which is a direct measure, the proportion of individuals with ICT skills, is still suffering from data availability. There's not many data available. Countries are still learning to collect those data. If we would give that index, sub-index, the same weight as the other 2, that would mean, because there are less indicators in the sub-index, that those 4 indicators would have a higher weight than the other 8 indicators on a per indicator basis. We didn't want to do that, so that's why we kept the 40-40-20. So when we collect the data, then we have to normalize the data to put them all on the same base and to be able to calculate a score. So the normalized value for an indicator is the value of the indicator as submitted by the country or as validated by ITU divided by the ideal value for that indicator. So that way a normalized value doesn't have a unit, because you divide 2 things by each other which have the same unit, then the unit disappears. The ideal value of an indicator, in some cases it's the highest possible. So for example, for the proportion of internet users cannot be more than 100, so 100 is the ideal value. We make one exception to that in the skills indicator, because we don't expect, for example, the most complex activity, which is programming, coding using a programming language. We don't expect 100% of the population ever to be able to code or to have done some coding in the last 3 months, and that's also not something that is desirable. We don't want 100% of nerds in a country. We also want some people to do other things. So there we actually have lowered the number to, I don't remember, 20 or 30%. In case an indicator doesn't have an upper value, we take the ideal value to be the mean plus 2 standard deviations. For example, I come with an example on the next slide actually. So this ideal value may or may not change every year. For something that is the highest achievable value, that will remain the same. 100% is 100% and is 100% next year. For something like where we use the mean plus 2 standard deviations, that obviously changes every year because the mean changes every year and the standard deviations as well. So, sorry, I'm going in the wrong direction. One specific indicator, international bandwidth, where we using log values, otherwise the spread becomes too wide. So we use the log or the ln. You can use both as long as you use the same one within your calculation. So for example, in 2017, when Iceland had the highest IDI score, they had an international bandwidth of 997,830. We calculated the ideal value, the mean plus 2 standard deviations, to be 2,158,000. The normalized value is log from the one divided by log of the others equals 0.95, or ln of the two values, which is also 95. So you can take the log or the ln as long as you use both in your coefficients. No, going in the wrong direction again. So the sub-index is a simple average of normalized values of indicators within that sub-index. So basically saying that all indicators within the sub-index carry the same weight. So in the axis sub-index, all 5 indicators count for 20%. In the use index as well. And in the skills indicators, all 4 indicators count for 25%. I have to put this upside down. The weights are 40, 40, 20, as I explained already. So what this means, all these calculation methods and ways of calculating, is that normalized values are between 0 and 1. If a normalized value is greater than 1, we set it to 1. All sub-indices are between 0 and 10, and the IDI is also between 0 and 10. So here we look at the countries from the 2 regions, the availability, or rather the non-availability of data, which I highlighted. I didn't put values in here because I didn't want people to start looking at which one is higher, which one is lower, how many for my countries. I only wanted to highlight where there are no data, which is highlighted in not available and in nice pink. So we can see that on the supply side, all countries submit all indicators in the CIS region except Tajikistan and Turkmenistan. In the Arab countries, I have 2 slides because there are more countries. We can see that on the access side, apart from the countries that have virtually no data, on the access side, everything is relatively fine. On the use side, we can see that there are some problems with the traffic indicators. And these are the other countries, and a bit the same. On the access side, it's mostly okay, except when a country has no data at all, and those are the countries that are in difficult situation. But on the use side, there's quite a few missing data, especially for the traffic ones. Going to the household side, we see more gaps. So in the CIS countries, we see 3 countries now that have no data at all. And then a few countries, most countries having trouble with especially the skills indicators, and I will see more about that later in the presentation. In the Arab states, we see also more countries that have no data at all. If they have data, they usually have all data, at least on this slide. And here we see that on the second one for the Arab states, that if you look again at this one and this one and this one, and we look at the skills, we see that skills is the big issue. That's because the skills indicator is relatively new, at least in the ITU questionnaire. And only since last year that it has been included in the IDI, more and more countries starting to collect it. So it's a new indicator. So the data caps are more on the demand side than on the supply side. That is very clear. The problem with data caps is that it can lead to non-official data. In particular, we will make estimates. Otherwise, we cannot produce the IDI. But it's also a call to you, to the countries, to coordinate data production and work with governments and data users to get the data, to get the missing data, and for the regulators to work with the NSOs to help them do surveys. Now, as you all know, we have the new indicators, and everybody was looking forward to seeing the results at WTIS for the 2018 IDI for the first time with new indicators, and at the last moment, more or less at the last moment, ITU decided that we did not want to publish the IDI, and that was because there were too many missing data, especially 58% of the IDI data would be estimates, whereas for the old one it was only 28%, and especially because of the 6 new indicators, where we had to estimate 77% of the data. So those indicators were not completely ready to be included in the IDI yet, I think is the conclusion that we can draw from here. More than 80 countries, for more than 80 countries, we had to estimate more than 50% of the data. And in the past, we used to say, if we don't have 50% data for a country, we don't include that country in the IDI. But of course, if you start taking out 80 countries out of the IDI, it's not an all-inclusive IDI anymore, and you're especially not showing data for developing and the least developed countries. And we're talking about ICT development, so for those countries it's extra important. So that would have also been, even if we would have followed this criterion, it would not have been a good situation. So the challenge, as I mentioned already, is partly also newness. Some data that were submitted, we didn't think they were completely in line with ITU definitions. Sometimes we made estimates and not all countries agreed with all of our estimates. So that also creates a problem. And the PP18 also called for the use of country data in Resolution 131. So we had a lot of concerns, too many estimates, quality of the data, and then when we looked at the results, there were some results that we found very hard to justify, that we did not want to justify in public because we were not comfortable in justifying them. We are fine if there are questions, and we're happy to answer questions and to justify, but only if we have confidence in our results, and we didn't have the confidence in the results. So we decided it was better not to publish the data. So let me highlight a few of those, let's say, methodological challenges. So the individuals with ICT skills. The problem is we don't have a lot of data. There are 9 activities. It's also very difficult to estimate the missing data because we have very few other country data to estimate it from. We don't have a lot of handles to say, okay, this must be correlated to this other thing. So at least we can make a model to help estimate. So we are pretty much in the blind. Now, those 9 activities, we aggregate them into 3 categories. The 4, let's say, least complex activities, we call them basic activities, and we say the highest among those 4 is the basic level for a certain country. The next 4 complex activities, we call them standard, and writing a computer program using a specialist programming language is the advanced skill level. Now, if you look at the data for all countries, you put them all together and you calculate the percentage, we can see that, I can't even read it from here, but this least complex activity, which is copying or moving a file or folder, is about 10 times as likely to happen as writing a computer program. So that is about the ratio that you have to look at. And of course, it can differ a little bit from one country to the next. So when we looked at the individual country level, when we looked at countries that had a long experience in collecting those data. Usually many of those are European countries reporting to Eurostat. On the left-hand side, you can see the ratio was between 5 and 18, which is nicely centered around the 10 that we saw globally. When we looked at countries that were newer, that didn't have a lot of history in collecting those data, we could see that it started lower and it ended higher, so the spread was much wider. So this could, of course, be a real phenomenon, although the one on the right is really an outlier. But it could also be a sign of countries not being able to interpret the definitions correctly, or respondents. Then, if we look at the traffic data, which we have to look at divided by the number of subscriptions and not by the number of inhabitants, we plotted it, and you can see on the horizontal axis the fixed broadband subscriptions per 100 inhabitants, and on the left hand, on the vertical axis, the IDI score, basically the IDI indicator, the fixed broadband internet traffic in gigabytes per fixed broadband subscription. And what you see on the left, in the circle on the left, is countries with almost no fixed broadband subscriptions, but still with a high IDI score. Which makes us wonder, maybe those are only organizations that are using fixed broadbands that have a higher usage, and is that really what you want to show in your IDI, or are you more interested in how the general population is using fixed broadband? On the right-hand side, in the oval there, you can see countries with a high, very high percentage fixed broadband penetration rate, but with a low IDI score, so many people using very little data. It could be true, but we are questioning whether this is really the result that you want to have in the IDI. And then the other one that I mentioned before, that the fixed broadband penetration rate was taken out of the IDI, it was replaced by fixed broadband subscriptions by speed tiers. And what you see here, that the orange bars is fixed broadband penetration rate. So on the right-hand side, you have countries with a very high fixed broadband penetration rate. And the blue dots are the IDI scores. So what you see there in the square on the top are countries with almost no fixed broadband penetration, but with very high IDI scores. And you can see that on the right-hand side, it's more or less what you expect. Countries with a high fixed broadband penetration rate, also with a high IDI score. But those countries there in the carré, is this really what you want? Apparently it is, because that's what the countries decided. But the countries decided that we give preference to countries that have very little fixed broadband subscriptions, but with very high speed, over countries with high fixed broadband penetration. So this is also something that needs to be contemplated again by the countries, we think. So what will happen this year? Because we said we will do capacity building, which we're doing here, for example. We will do it in different places of the world. We did capacity building last year as well, and we still ended up with a lot of missing data. There will be more data this year, that is certain, because countries are taking note. They have been trying to collect the data, and I'm pretty certain that there will be more data than we had last year. If it's enough, I don't know. That is the question that remains on our mind, that we have to see it after our data collection. We can only tell how much estimates we have to make. So there's a number of ways forward, and this is something that is completely undecided yet. Either there will be enough data, everything is fine, we will produce the IDI, but I think there will be some of the same issues as last year. In that case, we could either limit the number of countries included in the IDI, so you say, okay, if there's more than 50% of data that we have to estimate for a country, that country doesn't get included. That is one possibility. Another possibility, limit the list of indicators so that we take out the indicators where we really don't have enough data. The disadvantage of that one is if we take out the ICT skills indicator, there's no longer a direct measure of ICT skills, and that is the reason why that indicator was included. So if we go in either direction, we have to agree, of course, on what the threshold should be. Improve data availability and quality. We are doing that through the type of workshop that we're doing here. We're also, we'll send out a letter soon to all countries telling them which data are provided by that country and especially where the gaps are. And we also point to some presentations on our website where they can look at how to collect the data. Basically, the presentations that you're getting today in compressed form will be available. And in this year and next year, but especially this year, we will try to develop more materials that countries can use and then not necessarily have to go to a workshop, but there's also be more available online. So there are a certain number of ways forward. There are issues, and the issues are not going to disappear overnight, so it will take time. So we will again have to take a decision once we have processed the data and made our estimates. But at this point, I cannot tell you what that will be or which direction that will go. And if I press the right button, with that I end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin, and please, we have, how much time? We have 17 minutes, 16 minutes for questions, so the floor is yours. So. Please, пожалуйста.
Thank you very much, Martin. If nobody wants, okay, I will start the discussion. If I understand well, the main problem with acquiring the data on the new indicators, on new additions, but before of acquiring the data, I have feelings that we need to have better explanation of what new indicators have. For example, you have a new indicator add for access sub-index on fixed broadband subscription, but if, for example, first looking on subscription, it's clearly understandable for me that it's more for use, not access, because access is a technical availability of services provided to population. Second one, for example, some of the indicators are clearly directs to the consumer only. But for example, if we're talking about the traffic, do you divide the traffic to consumers, traffic to business, traffic to government, or not? Or do we acquire data and analyze data in one dimension, only for consumers or for whole population, including all of the business and governmental use? And third thing is about skills. You have a number of activities, but most of these activities is about using the computer itself. But it's not directly related to the access and use indicators. I will not speaking about the old one, about the general education, which we talked at morning coffee break, because it's not related at all. But how you feel, how it should be connected to the actual things we have in access and in use, because most of the skills is about the computer, maybe on the smartphone, but not about the bandwidth, not about the subscription and the same. And if talking in details, for example, about skills, you have a data that the least thing is just writing the program. But what's the complexity of program? Just input and print hello world, or it should be complex program. It's not understandable. So just to conclude, I had a lot of questions, but one of my suggestions that before we acquiring the data, I think it should be clearly explained what you want from the member state and member states to receive, because some of new indicators is not clearly understandable. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much for these comments. I actually, the first question, it's basically us throwing it back to you, because it's the member states in the extraordinary meeting that decided on those indicators. I agree with you that they're not all clear, and in my personal opinion, they may also not be all correct, and some of them were not ready. I think they were not mature enough to be included. So fixed broadband is seen as you need broadband to be able to do something. So it's in the access part, because fixed broadband is not actually doing something. It is having the availability of being able to use it. So that's why it has been moved. Fixed broadband penetration used to be in the use index. It has been moved by the countries to the access one. They also decided that they didn't want the penetration rate anymore, but by speed tier. And I joined ITU after that meeting, so I was not at the meeting. So I don't know exactly what happened in the discussions and how it went that way. I have the feeling that they wanted by speed tiers without actually really expressing the way in which it should appear in the index, but I could be wrong there. So what I showed in one of my graphs as well is that if you want to do that, then you still have to think about how you're going to show those indicators. And that is something that I think was missing in the process, because normally you take experts together that look at the data, that play with the data, that do some analysis of the data. They say, okay, this indicator could be included, this indicator could be included or not. Here we don't have enough data. Then you do the analysis, you do the sensitivity analysis, you do the correlation analysis, so that you can see if the index is stable, robust, and telling, or if you have 9 indicators that all say the same thing, and a 10th indicator that says something completely different, then if the 9 indicators all have the same weight and the 10th as well, then that 10th disappears in the total. So to have that kind of analysis. And I think that was the process in that meeting was more like finding political compromises. One country didn't want that, one country didn't want that, another one said this, another one said that. Okay, let's do this, without looking at the data. And then when we started looking at the data, then we found all the problems. So I think the process has not been done completely right, in the wrong order. Traffic, it's a good point. Traffic is a new indicator. It's a difficult indicator to collect, and Inigo will talk a lot about it this afternoon. But I don't think we are capable at this point of distinguishing between traffic by organizations, traffic by government, traffic by consumers. We have in subscriptions, we ask subscriptions by organizations, subscriptions by individuals, and even the subscription by organizations, we don't get a lot of responses. So, that should be easier. But the traffic, I'm not sure if it's impossible or just very difficult, but it's a very good point. It makes an impact. On the skills one, it's a skills sub-index. So there has been a sensitivity analysis of the Joint Research Center of all the indicators in the IDI, if they make sense, if they work well together, and their conclusion was they work well together. Of course, it depends. I mean, we have given them the conceptual framework. We said, this is the conceptual framework. I showed you the conceptual framework in the beginning. There's access, there's use, and there's impacts. We cannot measure impact, so we use skills instead, because with skills, you can create impacts. So in that sense, there is no direct link to access and skills. There's a link between use and skills, but not in the sense that you can see it in the indicator. Now, the problem with the skills indicator is that it's based on using a computer. We're revising the skills indicator at the moment. We have agreed at ETH to revise the indicator and make it device agnostic, as we say, so no longer activities on a computer, but depending on the activity, either on the internet or on any device. But of course, we're revising the indicator. It will not be this year that we ask countries to collect it, it will be next year. So that will have an impact on its use in the IDI as well. So in that sense as well, the indicator wasn't mature enough to be included in the IDI, not enough data and still in development, but there was a very strong request to have a direct measure of skills instead of the 3 indicators at all 3 an indirect measure. So that is the compromise that was taken. So this I hope at least responds to your questions. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Thank you, Martin, for the presentation. This is Mufareh from Saudi Arabia. I have a few questions related to the IDI. First of all, for this year, 2018, you've mentioned something related to that the way forward, we're going to decide whether to, for example, limit the number of indicators or limit the number of countries, for example, that are contributing to those IDI indicators. So my question is, when is this decision going to be taken? So this is related to 2018. Another question related to 2017, the previous year's data. With all the statistics that you have mentioned related to the non-availability of the data, 58% was estimation. There was around 77% of the, estimation on the 6 new indicators that have been added. My question is that now all these 2017 data have been submitted. Is there any chance that you look back to those indicators and try to, fix them? Just complete the missing data or something. And this is also related to what you have mentioned, that you're going to send a data gap letter to all countries. My question is, will that letter be customized to every country? And when that letter going to be issued? I have one more question only on the ICT skills. I do agree with my colleagues. However, we need some clarity on whether this is going to continue. From data collection perspective, are we going to continue, collecting this data or not? For the ICT skills question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. We were a bit late last year because we had all these troubles with the estimates that already in some cases we managed to have the long questionnaire from countries that we then used instead of normally we use a short questionnaire. So I think I don't think that even this year we will be getting a lot of data for 2017 that was missing when we were producing the IDI. So I think last year's IDI 2000 year, I have to admit, this is still a little bit not up in the air. We have a consultant looking at it. So let's have an external look to look at what happened, why it happened, what can be a way forward. This person will come to TDAC, and there will be some breakout groups. So at TDAC there will be a discussion, at least. After that, I don't know. This is something that the director is very aware of it. She knows it's important. She knows that we have problems. This is also why we hired this consultant, that we will talk about TDEC, and then she will have to decide on the exact way forward. We have promised an IDI for this year, so with 2018 data. That has been promised by my chief of department. But in what way, and I honestly don't know. The letter that will be sent will be customized per country. So it will be a general letter, and then and there's two annexes. Annex 1 with availability for your country for WTI data, and another one for the household data. So that will certainly be customized. The way forward with the skills is also...
When is that letter?
Huh?
When is that letter?
When is that letter? Well, I drafted it last week. And now I asked my colleagues to work on it this week, and then it will need to be submitted to the director. It needs to be signed, so it may be another week or 2 weeks before it comes, but it should come relatively soon. For the skills, this year we're still collecting the old one, and then I think that next year we will start collecting the new one. And that's the problem. You can say you should not change it because it's in the IDI, but everybody is not complaining, everybody is criticizing the skills indicator because it's computer-based, and that's a very justified criticism. So that's why we raised it at EGAs, had a subgroup, and we have revised it. So we're also following to some extent what Eurostat is doing. That also has made it at least device agnostic. So, and since we didn't publish the IDI, maybe this is also the best way forward, to change it as quickly as possible, so that going forward we at least have an indicator that we have more confidence in.
If you allow me, just one comment on the last, ICT skills. I mean, just in case this is changed or enhanced, I mean, countries need to have some time to adopt those changes into their, questionnaires and then in their surveys. So usually the annual surveys are conducted, let's say, starting from Q1. So usually they need at least some time before that to prepare their,
Yeah, what I've done is I have drafted the new methodological page already based on the subgroups input and the discussion at EGH. I've asked my colleagues to look at it, and then hopefully we can put this soon on the forum and on the website, so that in the next month or so the new methodological page is ready, so that countries have from that moment, let's say, almost a year to adapt their surveys.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we're closing time now to the coffee break, and let us break for 30 minutes and come back to the room at 3:30 to continue with the next presentation. Thank you. Dear participants, we're about to start, so please take your seats. We will start with the final session of our first day. And let me invite our speaker, our expert and long-term ITU expert, consultant, and whatever good can I say, to introduce Mr. Inigo Erguera, Associate Professor of Economics, Complutense University of Madrid. Inigo will cover IDI supply-side indicators in his today's presentations. Inigo, you have a 1.5 hour time slot, so the floor is yours. Пожалуйста, презентацию session 6 включите. Yes.
Thank you very much, Farid, for this one word. First of all, let me thank, by all means, the MITC here in Uzbekistan for the very nice, wonderful meeting organization. Also the regional offices of CIS and the Arab countries for the organization of this and for the invitation. Now, what I will do is to cover, and I hope I also need your cooperation, to cover mainly the supply side indicators of the IDI, the development index, the ICT development index that Martin was presenting just before. So we'll dig deeper into the supply side indicators. And in order to make it a bit more, I guess, interactive, I would like also you to please feel free to jump into any moment, into the discussion or questions or problems. And one thing that I think would be very important is, in order to make this movable, I'm sure that Karim and Farid will help me. If you don't feel comfortable in English, just jump in Arab or in Russian, and then I'm sure that, we can get a fluid discussion here. An important point here to make also is that I also want to hear about your experience, your problems, and the methods that you follow when collecting this data. I'm going to talk about supply side data, okay? Because here is where the problems, as you know, in the details is where the problems lie. And this could be also of interest. So I will be covering mainly supply side indicators from the IDI. The first slide that I have, I will not recoup. I will only recoup one that was presented by Martin on the IDI, so that you have an idea of what it is and where it comes, which is the following, which is, in 2017 there was a meeting, many of you came to the meeting in order to revamp, to redefine the IDI being used until then. And here what I have in red is the 3 supply-side indicators that were taken away from the IDI. And here in green, what I have is the new indicators, some supply-side, some were demand-side indicators that were introduced newly into the IDI. And we will focus on this, on the supply-side indicators. We will not be covering the skills indicators, which has been done already by Martin, and there will be a session on this. Well, okay, you know that all the indicators, they have the same weight. One important point about the supply-side indicators that I'm going to be talking about is the following. Some of them, they are indicators that by itself, they are aggregates. They are indices by themselves. For example, when we talk about population covered by 3G or LTE 4G networks, as you will see, it is a combination of the different coverage. When we talk about broadband by speed tier over total broadband lines, as you will see, is an aggregate index, what we are talking about. So be careful, because some of these indices, indicators used, they are combinations of indicators and not mere indicators. Okay. Well, just to mention the fact that these indicators, and not only the IDI indicators, are leafly indicators, I don't need to remind you how these new indicators have been introduced, and old indicators have been taken away, and indicators have been redesigned, or at least tied down, so that it was easier for collection. But I expect from your side as well to tell me of problems with the definitions, with the collection, or with the aggregation of indicators that we will be talking about. By the way, I will focus my talk on the IDI supply-side indicators, hence indicators that are inserted into the IDI. As you are very well aware, there are many other indicators that are being collected by the ITU, either in the short questionnaire or especially in the long questionnaire. So I will be talking slightly about some other indicators from the supply side, although focusing mainly on the indicators that come up in the IDI. So please feel free to jump in. Well, so that you get a picture of how lively it is, in 2013 there were new indicators defined. In 2015, new indicators defined, like for example the M2L mobile network subscriptions, which we will be talking about this tomorrow when we talk about IoT. Then the percentage of the population covered by at least a 4G LTE type of network. This is a new indicator inserted 3 years ago. Or subscription to bundled telecom services, which is a very important indicator. Several indicators actually are behind. We will be talking about this tomorrow. But, so that you can see new indicators already in 2016, new indicators in 2017, and so, the thing is live. By the way, on the price baskets, we will be talking about it tomorrow again. There is a special session dedicated to it, because again, there was an update and small changes in the price basket that we are using in order to monitor our evolution of prices. Well, these are, by the way, I hope everybody is clear by now, supply-side indicators, meaning indicators being collected by usually the regulatory authority in each country and always collected from the scope of the operators, the telecom operators active in the country. So this is operator, at the very end, is operator-based data, the one that is picked up by the regulatory authority and later it's being aggregated. Okay. Now, the first indicator which is included, and this is a long history indicator, being included in the IDI, as you know, is the International Internet Bandwidth Indicator per Internet user. It was in a very interesting presentation. Timur Mashampan from Uzbekistan was telling how in Uzbekistan new international exchanges and routes have been implemented recently, and it will affect, for example, this indicator. This is an indicator that has a lot of history, has been there in the IDI for a long, long while, and there has been a lot of discussion on it. I will very briefly comment on it because it's not new. It's a kind of historical one, just in case you have any questions and to refresh. We are collecting, in terms of international internet bandwidth, I would like to underline the word international, first of all. It's not national, domestic capacity. And then we are measuring here two things. One is the capacity by itself, which is called the equipped or the lit capacity in fiber. Or then we are also collecting, as you know, the effectively used or consumed capacity by a country at the aggregate level. Let's start with the use capacity. The use capacity, which is measured in megabits per second or in other proportional measure, is the average use of all the links that internationally connect the domestic trunk lines with the rest of the countries. It, and this is very important, it includes, of course, fiber optic cables, which are the main source of trunk routes international to be deployed, but it may also be composed of radio links or traffic going through satellites, ground stations. All of these links, which imply an international routing, fixed, mobile, or satellite, should all be counted for, all. And how to make a measure of usage? Well, we take the average over the 12-month period or among the 2-semester period, whenever the window of opportunity that you are using is a temporal dimension. It might be, and it is usually the case, that in international traffic, it is not the same the upgoing or incoming traffic or the outgoing traffic. It's usually they are pretty asymmetric, although it depends a lot from country to country topology in the network. Well, you should always get, just for clarification, the maximum of the incoming or the outgoing traffic, but only the maximum. of all the international routes that there are. This is for the usage. In terms of usage, of course, topologies of networks are becoming more complex, as you are very well aware of. And here there is a couple of issues that what is counted in green, and what is not counted, the last box. Counted in, of course, is self-supply, any kind of international transit peering agreement, of course, any content provider, over-the-top content provider that is transporting from outside the country, inbound, some traffic, or any kind of IP, of course, internet-based service. What is not included is the national or domestic traffic. Furthermore, with this indicator, we have to be extremely careful without the double counting effect. If you can measure, of course, international traffic, you can measure it at the wholesale level, or because there are contracts among the operators in order to deal with this traffic, or you can measure it at the retail level. The important thing to do is not to double count the traffic from being counted as wholesale or as being counted as retail. And this is an extremely important point, otherwise the whole picture is distorted. Now, this was for the usage, but now let's talk about the equipped. Equipped, or is the nominal capacity of the international bandwidth routes that the country has. Again, it is the capacity of any kind of network, satellite, mobile, radio wave-based, or fixed, which is traditionally the main bulk of it, which is, and we talk about the nominal capacity, or the equipped capacity, bandwidth capacity, that all these networks, they have vis-a-vis, domestically vis-a-vis the rest of the world. It is measured as well in megabits per second. Yeah, now. By the way, there are some examples of monitoring tools which you may use or not, this depends, in order to count for international internet bandwidth. And there are these CACT and OpenNMS. There are other type of software that may help you approximating this international route traffic, especially the usage one. Okay, let's go to another indicator that has had a small development in the last years, which is the coverage, mobile coverage indicator. As you are very well aware, it was discussed as well in several active meetings that there was the need to include coverage not only of 2G or 3G networks, but as well to include the coverage of the 4G, LTE, or WiMAX dedicated networks. This was already agreed a couple of years ago, and now, as you are probably aware of, it is being asked in the long questionnaire and in the short questionnaire of the ITU. As you know, population covered, let's define it. Let's see, is irrespective of whether they are active subscribers or not. What is pretended here with mobile coverage is to get the number of inhabitants, meaning population always, not territory, but population, that is covered by a specific network, be it 3G, be it 2G, be it 4G. So we measure three things based on technology, which is any mobile cellular signal, or only the 3G mobile signal coverage, or at least LTE 4G mobile network signal. And again, this is supposed to be a coverage indicator over the population, not over the geography. And before, we were seeing plots by Martin, how, as we can expect, you know, the 2G coverage all over the world was like 80-something, 90%. 3G coverage is very high as well in most of the countries, and 4G coverage depends. So these are mobile coverage indicators. As you can see, there are three, not only one, which are divided into coverage by 2G networks, coverage by 3G networks, which we are going to see now, and coverage by 4G networks. The coverage of the 3G networks over the population is, as you can imagine, the percentage of the population covered by at least one 3G network. At least one. Irrespective of whether or not they are actual subscribers. as you can imagine, and I would like to hear your word on this, there are many ways to measure 3G coverage over the population. A very common method in many countries is you ask the operator to tell you nationally what is the coverage of the population, or you ask him to tell the coverage by province or by region or even by smaller administrative units. It depends on the country. The truth of the matter is that when you pick up all the coverage declared by the operators, you always have to pick up the maximum one over the population, at least for that administrative unit. And later you aggregate over administrative units. Later I have an example of how you do it in Japan, which is more or less this approach, okay? So this is for 3G networks. Of course, 2 years ago, it was introduced as well the coverage of the population of 4G or LTE networks, which, so far in most of the countries is a subset of the total coverage. Again, the same definition is the number of the proportion of people, inhabitants, that live within a range that receive the signal of an LTE 4G network. Whether or not they do subscribe to it or not, we don't care. We just ask the operator if that population in that area is covered or not covered. As an example, well, I was telling to you methodologies. There are many, really, to get this data. But usually, the most commonly is each operator the one who reports the data of coverage of a population to the regulator. And of course, if you have 4 operators, you pick up the maximum value, the coverage of the guy who is covering the maximum of the population, and you forget about the rest. Usually, and I'm sure that you face this situation, the operator doesn't tell you the national coverage of a network. Usually what they do is they tell you, well, I will give it to you by province or by region. And then they give you a spreadsheet of, I don't know, 50 regions in your country, and in each region, each operator declaring specific coverage. Again, the method is the same. You pick up for each region or administrative unit, you pick up the maximum value for that region and you stick to it. And later you get region after region. And this will give you a total. I give you one example, which was, I think, an example by Japan. Suppose we have a country with only 3 regions, 1, 2, and 3, and suppose that there are only 3 operators. Operator 1 has 70% of coverage in population in region 1, and only 50% coverage in region 2, and 80% coverage in region 3. You can imagine the aggregation here, how it goes. Say for region 1, you pick up only 1, which is operator 2. You see, it's the maximal operator there with coverage. And you will end up concluding, at least for region 1, the coverage of at least one 3G or 4G network is 80% of the population, because you assure that at least one operator is covering it, and the rest you just ignore it. And the same goes for any other, as you can see, the total aggregation is a weighted average based on the population of each region. This is the most commonly used procedure as far as I'm aware of. Of course, there are many subtleties coming into how to aggregate and how to declare the coverage in a specific region. This example is done by Japan, and because the operator may ask you, well, what do you want, how do you want me to count a specific region or city or province or whatever? How do you want me to count it as covered or not covered? Because it may be that I cover 90% of the population in this region, but I don't cover the 100% of the population. What is the threshold value? And okay, here you can play around a bit, but usually, for example, in Japan, the way it is done is if you are covering less than 50% of the population in a specific region, define it as you define it, then do not count it as being covered, okay? This is the way it is done. By the way, in Japan, they don't define administrative regions. They define administrative units which are extremely small. They are 500 meters of length. So you can imagine the precision that they are reaching with these coverage indicators, which is huge. So if you are thinking of refining the method of collection and estimate of collection, do tell the operators, to the extent that it is possible for them, which I'm sure that they have it, to define the administrative units as small as possible. It will get you much more precise estimates. And on this, we have a lot of evidence. Okay, this was for the mobile coverage 3G or 4G, which the methodology underlying it is more or less the same. Yep. Now, a very hugely important indicator, as you know, is the fixed broadband subscriptions by speed. And now, and I don't want to mix you up, guys, I'm going to talk about two measures. One is based on 3 intervals of speeds. The other one is the same, but based on 6 intervals of speeds. That's because in the IDI, I want to make this very clear, in the IDI index, we are using only 3 speed tiers for fixed broadband. But ITU in the long questionnaire is collecting as well another, as you will see, richer set of intervals, which are, by the way, perfectly compatible with these ones, and this is very important. But in the IDI, I want to make this very clear, this is the one that is being used, that is being collected in the small questionnaire, which is the fixed broadband subscription. By the way, just before getting to the intervals of speed, as you know, the definition of broadband, there has been quite a bit of discussion in the ECTI meetings on what is broadband. Because usually, traditionally, as you know, broadband is defined as anything that gives you 256 kilobits per second or more, right? A lot of countries are interested in higher speeds, of course, in order to define broadband. And there was a lot of discussion going back and forth, and, you know, should we higher up this 256 kilobits threshold or not, and stuff. The problem was of consistency over time, you know, which is if we break down this criteria and we set up the limit of speed higher, then we will break down the whole time series of what is broadband and the amount of broadband in a country. An indicator which, as you can imagine, is extremely used every day, right? Which, in order not to distort this historical series, the definition of broadband is kept the same. So no matter what, each country later is free for its own internal use to define broadband in the way he wants, of course. But the definition of broadband for international collection is kept the same, which is anything that gives you more than 256 kilobits per second download, full stop. As well for mobile, as well for, as you know, for fixed broadband, okay? A very interesting split of broadband is based on technology, and this is something that is advisable to collect. Actually, talking about technology, in technology there was a small caveat here to be said that 2 years ago in the ECTI it was discussed, which is the following. Everybody agrees that fixed broadband is based on XDSL, the old copper-based network of the incumbent, traditional incumbent. Everybody agrees that fixed broadband is the one that is provided by a cable operator, of course. It's fiber up to very close to the home. Everybody agrees that broadband, fixed broadband, is the fiber to the home, fiber to the basement, fiber to the cabinet, any FTTX thing, and other wired that you may imagine. Okay, then in fixed broadband, we are inserting as well any kind of wireless technology that is providing high speeds for you, as satellite broadband, or fixed wireless broadband. I don't know the situation in some of your countries, but I know that in some countries, for example, this WiMAX technology is pretty widely used, especially in rural areas. So a WiMAX technology at the very end is a wireless thing, at least in the last mile. But since it is supposed to be used from a fixed location, it is to be considered as a fixed broadband thing. Am I clear, more or less? And the same goes for satellite. Some people do receive the broadband speed via the satellite, right? In rural areas, in many countries. Well, since you are supposed to be using it from a fixed location, so the consumer point of view here matters, then it is to be considered as fixed. You can say as a last name, fixed, but wireless. Well, okay, fine, but it's going to be counted in a fixed. And then we will talk about it later. We have, as you know, the mobile-based broadband subscriptions, which are different. So just this in terms of technology, which, by the way, I recommend everybody, and I'm sure that everybody almost is collecting it via, based on technology. It is very useful in order to see the development of a country, to see how each technology is implemented over time. Let me just say, although you know it probably, the fixed broadband definition is just any connection that gives you access to the public IP internet that is able to provide you with a speed of 256 at least kilobits per second. And it includes any kind of technology. It should include, as you see it, fixed WiMAX and other fixed wireless technologies. Okay, but I don't think there is any issue with the definition. Now, fixed broadband, of course, it is developing so fast in the last 17 years since its birth, more or less, that there was the interest from long ago to pick up the measure of fixed broadband by speed tier. It is not the same to enjoy a 1 megabit speed connection than to enjoy a 100 megabit connection, of course, right? And in order to pick it up, there was a speed interval that is this one with only 3 interval speeds, which is the one to be used in the IDI. Although, as you will see, the ITU last year extended this, but not to be used in the IDI. So the speeds are, you know this because this is the traditional speed tiers. The speeds are connections that offer you nominally or theoretically speeds between 256 kilobits up until 2 megabits per second. The medium range, which is connections, fixed connections that offer you speeds from 2 megabits per second up until 10 megabits per second. And connections, fixed connections that offer you 10 or more megabits per second speed. At least nominally, I insist on this. So this is as you know, the traditional definition. One small point on Wi-Fi, because I know that sometimes it creates some problems, which is, as you know, Wi-Fi is very much used as a last resort access mode, and depending on how it is configured, its topology, it may be counted as a fixed broadband connection or not. For example, if you have Wi-Fi of course, in-house, which we all have it probably in our houses, in our homes, of course, you shouldn't double count thing. Yeah, if I have Wi-Fi at home, but I have a fixed fiber connection up to my home, I should count it only as one, which is the fixed fiber connection. No matter if internally to my home I am providing with my own family via Wi-Fi. Okay, this Wi-Fi used at home should not be counted, even counted as a broadband connection, because you're already counting it with a fixed line, first of all. Secondly, when you do count it, is sometimes in some little towns, I know it in some countries, they are using Wi-Fi antennas to cover few houses, but some number of households, limited number. And this is a last mile is wireless, is Wi-Fi actually, but since the people are going to be using it from a fixed location, from their homes, always fixed, this is to be counted as a fixed broadband, because actually the usage is to be fixed. And then another thing which you probably know, are aware of it, but just in case, if you go to a hotspot, to a Starbucks cafe or whatever, and you use a public hotspot, this is not to be counted as a fixed broadband connection, okay? This is something else. So this was just a couple of caveats on the Wi-Fi. Now, without wanting to disturb, for the IDI, the indicator to be picked up, to be used, is the one that I show it to you guys. But the ITU, and it was discussed already last year, agreed, ECTI, in the ECTI meeting, agreed to collect fixed broadband also in other speed tiers. Because the evolution is changing so much that a lot of people, they do enjoy speeds of 100 megabits per second, 200 megabits per second, 50 megabits per second, and you want to pick up this kind of evolution, right? In many, many countries. So we agreed on this, and we defined 3 new speed tiers, which I'm going to show them to you because they're very easy. Look, you have up in the slide, you have the old speed tiers, the one to be used yet today in the IDI and being collected. And below, 4, 5, and 6 are the new speed tiers, which you can imagine are more or less common sense, which are to be, to reflect the evolution of, as you can see, cable or fiber type of connections, right? Which are the connections that are able to offer you up from 30 megabytes per second onwards, right? So this whole set of speed tiers are being asked by ITU in the long questionnaire, even though for the IDI, only the first 3 are going to be used. Any questions so far? No? Okay, so these ones, yeah, please.
Я задам вопрос на русском языке и хотел бы немножко вернуться назад к вопросу покрытия населения, охвата населения связью. Вы рассказали достаточно подробно о подходах к тому, как физически измерять охват, но я хотел бы уточнить, а какое население вы предполагаете здесь брать? Будет ли как-то учитываться миграционные потоки?
Oh, good question. Thank you. Thank you for the question. Usually the way it is done is by persons that are resident in that specific location, region, city, whatever, council, province, whatever. Because as you can imagine, even though the operators may have more updated information on population flows, most probably, but you can imagine that they have to refer to population figures being published by the National Statistical Institute, typically, every year. Hence, as far as I'm concerned, I know that operators, they do use official statistics for the denominator, for the population, right? Which they rely on the National Statistical Office. This, as far as I'm concerned, this is so, yeah. And it's any kind of population that is resident, officially resident on that unit, as far as I know. Thank you. Thank you. Any please.
Regarding the international internet bandwidth, okay, the used capacity, when the ITU changed the definition and included the satellite operators as well for, I think it was for the African countries, did this change in the methodology affected the results in terms of the other countries?
This, to be honest with you, these I don't know. I don't know if this introduction of the satellite capacity as an addition, as you mentioned, which is correct, I don't know if it really changed the whole numbers and the IDI results of some countries. I know that in some countries they use satellite, but only in certain parts of the country. In some countries this part may be big, this is correct. But as far as I know, in most of the countries, the part covered by satellite is not as huge. Nor in terms of population, nor in terms of capacity, very especially. Because usually satellite is more expensive than other ways of dealing with international bandwidth. Okay?
Given that the ITU is changing the definition a lot, I don't think that countries are aware that the definition has changed. So we need to know if the ITU, for example, make a certain studies for the change in the definition versus the change in the data reply. It would be important for the country, it will encourage country to update the data collection according to new definition. Otherwise, countries are not really, I don't know if they are aware of the changes and if they were updating the data collection accordingly. Okay, my second question is related to the VDSL. Where to report the VDSL?
Oh, the VDSL, well, as a technology, it is clear that it is copper-based. As a technology, which is the same, put it that way, as XDSL. It's using the same infrastructure, exactly the same infrastructure as the XDSL. So, as technology, I would put it in the old copper wire traditional network. In terms of speeds, the VDSL, it depends a bit slightly from country to country, but usually it may offer you speeds higher than 20, higher than 30 megabits per second, higher than 40, up until 50, as far as I know, in some countries. Hence, there, what you have to see is what is the nominal speed announced by the operator with the VDSL connection. If they offer you, say, I don't know, 50 megabits per second, then it should be in the third interval of the speed tier. If they offer you, usually they offer between 20, 30, then it should be below the 30 threshold, 30 megabits threshold. But as a technology, but no doubt, it's an XDSL technology. Yes, please. Oman.
My name is Hamad Nasr Shukeli. I'm from Oman. My question is related to mobile coverage. if we have a land area, and this land area is covered by 2 operators, so each operators cover different localities. For example, the first 60%, the second 40%. These two are not, they have no intersection. So if we take 60%, that's mean 40% counted as not covered, but in reality it's covered by the other 40%, while they are separate from each other. How can we deal with this situation?
Well, one very simple answer would be just narrow down, make smaller the administrative unit where they have to declare the data. Don't talk about regions, talk about, I don't know, in some countries, but talk about councils, or talk about set of cities, or set of, aggregate somehow the areas coming from smaller to bigger, but do not define such a huge area as a region, because it may be too huge and it may distort, as you say.
So the solution is to minimize the size of the enumeration area.
Yeah, clearly. Usually, as far as I'm aware of, in many countries, I don't mean in all, because as I say, I mean, methods behind this, there are many, but usually the areas defined by operators are very small, very small. I mean, not even provinces, but councils or cities, or even some towns. So it's very small. In Japan, they do it, Japan, they are special, maybe, you know, because they are very sophisticated, but they do it in units of 500 meters, you know, which is amazing, yeah. But I guess the solution would be narrow down the scope of the administrative unit you are using as the base reference, right?
Okay.
Please, more questions. Yep, sure.
So this is Raya from TRA Oman. I just have 2 questions. The first question regarding mobile coverage, because we've been hearing, I'm not sure if it's too early to ask this question, but anyway, we have been hearing that globally some countries are thinking of switching off 2G or 3G in order to use the spectrum for other generations. So in case a country decided to switch off 3G, because for some countries 2G is more efficient and it's mainly used for M2M services. So if we switched off 3G, then how, and 3G and the mobile coverage for at least 3G is part of IDI. So my question is, did you take this into account when you added this indicator in the new IDI methodology? And the other question, how we're going to report this indicator? This is the first question. My second question is regarding the international bandwidth used. If you can please go to the slides.
Yep.
For the used capacity. Yes, here it says that it should be taken, no, the average should be calculated over the 12-month period. So do you mean by this is by taking the average of the 12 months? Because here in our country, we receive monthly average used international bandwidth. And then, so when we report to ITU, do we have to report the average of the average, or we take the average of the last month of the period, which is December? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. On the second one, first of all, on the bandwidth, I mean, if you are so lucky to have a monthly measurement of international internet bandwidth, congratulations, first of all. So in principle, the most representative measure, I would tend to say, is the average of all the months, in principle. But there is seasonality, most probably, in international internet bandwidth, as in any other traffic in internet. So in order to be careful, you would need to see what the pattern over the year is, and just to get something that you believe is representative, rather. I would be careful just taking an average like that, or picking up only the last month, because there may be seasonalities that you might want to take into account. This is not that difficult to do. On the first one, there is a lot of refarming of spectrum, as you know. Of course, it happens with all the bands, almost all the bands going from 3G to 4G, soon maybe to 5G, and from 2G to 3G. I mean, you know, all kind of games, right? Usually, people, what they are really demanding, as you know, and what is really growing, is not the voice mobile service, it's data. This is clear all across the world, really, as far as I am aware of. Hence, if some country or some operator decides to close down a 3G network, it is because it is shifting all its customers to a 4G, at least, network. Not because it wants to shift all the customers to the 2G network. It doesn't make any sense because you don't get any broadband with that. Hence, it would be picked up as an increase in 4G and a decrease in 3G coverage. Well, okay, that's fine. Because this is a composite indicator coming in the ITI. It's an indicator that covers the whole, any coverage with any network, a coverage with 3G, and coverage with 4G. Hence, it's kind of a zero-sum game, if you want to put it that way, if you are shifting up people from 3G to 4G, more or less.
But here we're talking about coverage, not subscriptions. It's different.
Good one.
And I think it will affect the IDI because one indicator will be missing, so our ranking will be affected.
Good one. Excuse me. I didn't get that point. Yeah, you are talking about coverage. Excuse me. Yeah. Yeah, it might affect, although it might affect, you are right, but although I believe the effect would be very temporary. Because it doesn't make sense to my eyes, in principle, to switch all people to 4G if I don't have a good, very good, widened coverage of 4G in my country. I don't know how I'm going to really deal with that, right? But it's true that meanwhile it may affect, you are correct, it may affect the 3G coverage. But think about, again, it's a composite index. You will have small coverage in 4G, but unless you shut down the 3G network, you still have the coverage that you had before in 3G network. So I don't know, I mean, this shifting of numbers between the two networks, I don't know exactly how it would work. I don't know if it would be negative or even positive for you, because they are usually like mounting up. It's not that you close down 100% of your 3G network from one day to the other. This usually doesn't happen, as far as I'm aware of. Please, more questions. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This is Mustafa Walid, representing the Communications and Media Commission of Iraq. I have one question about the voice over IP technology. Can we classify it as a fixed broadband subscription or a mobile broadband subscription? The voice over IP technology. Can we classify it as a fixed broadband subscriptions?
Thank you. There are two ways of providing voice over IP, as far as I'm aware of. One is an all is IP. All is IP. One is the official operator offering you a normal standard subscription, but it's voice. But it's providing it not via the old COPA-based network, but via voice over IP with some, as you know, some parameters of quality that has to be abided to. And this is a standard voice fixed subscription, as you know, as the previous one, no matter what. Another thing is that an over-the-top operator, an over-the-top, literally, provides you with a voice over IP, of course, voice over broadband is called, subscription or service, right? Usually, what I'm aware of, but you know, it may depend from region to region, this second thing is called voice over broadband. Whereas the first one is called voice over IP. At the very same time, it's the same because, you know, you are providing. But again, you know, I think the point is to see how the operator is selling it. If it's a traditional operator selling a fixed subscription for the traditional price, no matter what, it is called a fixed telephony subscription, no matter what, the technology underlying it. The other subscriptions are not counted for, actually, the over-the-top subscriptions. Yes, please.
Thank you. Just clarification questions. First one is regarding the lit-equipped capacity. Just to confirm my understanding, this is where you mean the total purchased or owned capacity? That's not used. Okay. The second one is related to the FBB subscriptions. You've mentioned the FTTH and FTTB, so I assume that for all subscriptions, it includes both consumer and enterprise subscriptions. Yeah. Now, my question is, what about the leased lines or you know, those subscriptions with very high speed or you know, capacities? Last question is related to the voice over IP. For example, in our country, most of let's say, FTTH subscriptions are provided with voice over IP, bundled with it or contracted with it. So is it correct that we, when it comes to the FBB subscriptions, we submit the number of FTTH, subscriptions, and when it comes to the voice, we submit maybe, I would say, similarly, the voice subscriptions?
Yeah, yeah. On the second question, yes, I don't see any problem, which is, as I said, if they are offered and charged for by the telecom operator in the same way as any traditional fixed telephony subscription, it is a fixed telephony subscription, full stop, right? On the first thing, thank you for the point, because, well, first of all, fixed broadband encompasses any fixed active broadband subscription, no matter the client, if it's a household, if it's a firm, if it's an institution, no matter what. First of all. Secondly, there was the attempt and this was discussed in the ECTI, I remind you, there was the attempt to measure, because it is in the long questionnaire, to measure enterprises' subscriptions to broadband. The problem is, it was not very successful, I have to say. Which is a very nice indicator, very relevant indicator, no doubt about it. Thank you for the question. But it was not very successful. Hence, it is more or less there. On the side, to put it that way. Yeah. Well, let me continue a couple of minutes, and then we come back to questions. Yeah, we were.
Можно задать один вопрос?
Excuse me. Yeah.
Спасибо большое вам за содержательный, обстоятельный такой доклад. Я бы хотел задать один вопрос. Ведется ли работа по определению как показатель информационной безопасности телекоммуникации и ICT и включить его в перечень тех показателей, которые будут влиять на развитие ICT, который мы сегодня рассматриваем. Если ведется, то на каком уровне? Спасибо.
Yeah, good question. I want to remind you the discussions that have been taking place in the last two ECTI meetings in September. Usually they are held in Geneva, where there has been quite a bit of discussion. And in the online forum, there was some experience sharing, very interesting one, by the way, on security indicators, how they were defined. We were at the initial stage, how they were defined, how countries would implement it, what kind of things they would be measuring and what not. At the end, as far as I can remember, and anyone here can testify it if not, it was messy to get any kind of grasp, clear grasp, of how to measure from an international, worldwide perspective, security in the networks, in the telecom networks, for many reasons. There are some measures available. There are some countries who do attempt to measure this. But from what we saw, and this was a 2-3 years ago discussion, it was extremely heterogeneous, the way it was being measured. Most of the countries would not declare, at least, measuring this, the telecom regulator I'm talking about, because it's not his own problem, first of all. And it was really almost impossible, really, to advance on that discussion. We were all aware, I remember this, that it is important by all means, because, security is important here, right? But it is a thing that in general, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, because you are the guys who are on the regulators usually do not take care of this. The ministries directly do not take care of this. It is another agencies, which we don't deal with in our groups, the ones who may be dealing with this. This is, as far as I can remember, this was the sort of the conclusion I could deduce from the whole thing, right? Yeah.
И скажите, вот этот вот вывод, на котором вы остановились в последнее время, он наверняка требует дальнейших серьезных, обсуждений. И наверняка, Международный союз электросвязи – это орган, международный орган, который выдает только рекомендации. Он ничего, значит, там приказать не может, указать не может. Он может дать только рекомендации. А нельзя ли разработать рекомендации международного уровня, который, значит, в принципе, значит, регуляторный орган ни к чему не обязывает, но для них будет какой-то рекомендательный документ, в каком направлении надо им двигаться, чтобы достичь определенных показателей оценки информационной безопасности, значит, в их стране. И так постепенно, значит, может этот вопрос встать на ноги. Если помните, был единственный показатель, когда сеть телекоммуникаций была только аналоговой, цифровой не было, был единственный показатель на 100 жителей, сколько должно быть телефонов. И все стремились, чтобы на сети было побольше телефонов. Может быть, такой рекомендательный документ, значит, целесообразно создать? Как вы думаете? Спасибо.
Thank you for the suggestion. The only thing I would say is everybody is really welcome to participate in this kind of recommendation building in the ECTI online forum and in the ECTI work being done, or in the EGH, depending on the type of message that you are thinking of. I tell you that there is such a huge heterogeneity, and the actors that you are facing are not the real experts on this. And I'm talking about ECTI, EGH. But still, of course, you know, anything is open, of course. I mean, and we have been discussing it for a while. You are very welcome to really implement any kind of discussion, any kind of idea, any kind of measurement being done on these lines, of course. This is what the forum is for. Well, thank you. Yep.
Muchas gracias, Inigo. Я попробую вклиниться в этот вопрос. Это рекомендательные документы и как их можно разработать. В своей презентации ранее этим утром я отмечал, что необходимо обеспечить взаимодействие между группами экспертов и исследовательскими комиссиями. В частности, в исследовательской комиссии 2 есть вопрос по безопасности, и также исследовательская комиссия ответственная за выпуск не только отчетов, но также и по возможности рекомендаций МСД, то есть рекомендации для чистого внедрения на национальном уровне. И в связи с тем, что этот вопрос как субиндекс обсуждается на группах экспертов, в связи с тем, что глобально это обсуждается на собраниях исследовательской комиссии по вопросу 3.2, исследовательской комиссии 2, это может быть одним из тех примеров, как группы экспертов и исследовательской комиссии, соответственно, разные наборы делегатов, которые участвуют в обоих форматах, могут взаимодействовать. То есть это может быть одним из тех направлений, по которому стоит вести взаимодействие. Благодарю вас.
Yes, please, Safa.
Just to comment on the cybersecurity, there is an index called the Global Cybersecurity Index, which is already published by the ITU. So they are measuring, but it's not through the department responsible for the indicators. So the ITU measures the cybersecurity. So just.
Thank you. Thank you. Again, any issue on these lines, any other issue is welcome in the online forum. The only thing I'm meaning is, because I lived through it, is the fact that we are institutions representing regulators, basically, who are not the ones to be in charge of this kind of issue. This is what I faced a couple of years ago in the yeah? But still, if you don't mind, let's continue. Yeah, we were talking about fixed broadband, the new speed tires.
Я извиняюсь, значит, я вот не получил ответ на мой вопрос. Показатель информационной безопасности и кибербезопасности, он должен быть в составе тех показателей, которые мы рассматриваем, или он не должен быть?
there is a very easy reply to this. The forum is absolutely open, and it has shown it by history, to collect any new and to propose any new indicator that is deemed as necessary for development and makes sense in the context of the ITU big, broad objectives. And this is shown by history. I put you in the first slides all the easily 8, 10, I don't know how many in the last 3 years, new indicators coming up, right? As I said, if I told you that there were some difficulties because we have discussed it, and I know that many of us do not deal with this from our national domestic institutions, right? But we are free to propose any kind of line on this if we believe it encompasses into the big objectives of the ITU, you know. So feel free, please. Huh? Yeah. Now let's mention very briefly the indicator on active mobile broadband subscriptions per 100 inhabitants, because this was an indicator also very much used. You all know about it. But there was a small change 3 years ago. Nothing big, but you know that mobile broadband, you can contract it and you can consume it together with your voice in your smartphone terminal. And usually you contract it in a bundle way. Yeah? On bundles we'll be talking about tomorrow. And you pay together for voice and for broadband a unique price per month. You may as well have a voice subscription and add on to that in your same smartphone, you add on some data capability, some data subscription. And in both cases, this is mobile broadband, active, handset-based. As you know, even though it's, as you know, there are other ways of getting broadband through mobile networks, which is via a USB dongle, my PC or my portable PC with a USB data card thing, or with a tablet, and there is a lot of emergence of tablets in the market, right, where sometimes they come with a data card inserted, sometimes not, but you can insert one, plug it in. And this, since they suppose a tablet doesn't offer you voice directly, it offers you only data connectivity. These type of subscriptions are called computer-based or dedicated or data-only subscriptions. But at the end, both things combined are the mobile broadband figure that we want really to measure. And this is a highly important figure to measure. So, here is like a schema between active-based and computer-based. Again, the definition of broadband is the same as with fixed networks, anything that can give you more than 256. And there is one caveat to, which I'm sure that you are aware of it, one caveat that you have to be careful with, which is, you know that broadband subscriptions, they can be contracted via on a contract, and you make a payment month after month, month after month, whether you use it or not. And in this case, this subscription has to be counted as active because you are paying for it month after month. But you know that broadband, as well as voice, can be contracted on a prepayment sort of basis, right? Which is, I contract one gigabyte, and maybe I consume it in 1 week, and then I don't contract anything more. I don't compromise, don't commit with the operator in any case. If I have a prepayment subscription, not a contract one, then this subscription has to pass what we call the activity criterion, which is it has had to be active in the last 3 months. Otherwise, this subscription to broadband or to voice, for that matter, is not to be counted as active, right? Again, and this is very important, any subscription that is not on the contract-based, it has to pass the activity criterion, which is to have made a connection in the last 3 months. Otherwise, it is not to be counted as an active broadband subscription, only for the prepayment modality. But I'm sure that you know about this. So I will not run through the definition, which I mainly expressed it already. So we have 2 mobile broadband categories, the one that is usually combined with voice and the one that is only mobile for tablets, smartphones. And here there are some examples which you will find them interesting to review when you have to pass the 3 months criteria, activity criteria, or not needed. But basically the distinction is between contract-based, then it is an active subscription, or prepayment-based, in which case you have to pass the 3 months activity criteria. Any questions so far? No. Then let's talk about mobile broadband traffic per mobile broadband subscription. You know, mobile broadband traffic is any kind of traffic measured in exabytes that within the country that has been passed through a 3G or higher network, like 4G, LTE type of network. When counting mobile traffic, broadband traffic, we have to count the download and the uploaded one, and sum them up. If possible, this would be the nicest thing to be done, the traffic should be measured at the end user access point. And here we have an advantage, which is, since the telecom mobile operators, usually they charge you for usage, usually, in terms of data, they do measure for their own commercial interest, they do measure with a lot of precision the usage at the last point, at the user point. So it should not be that difficult to get this figure correct from the operators because they are charging for that. And the traffic should be reported in exabytes, which is, as you know, is a huge figure. A very much related indicator with bigger numbers is the fixed broadband internet traffic per fixed broadband subscription. You already know about the definition, which is the traffic generated by any fixed broadband subscriber measured at the end user access point. You should adding up download and uploaded traffic. One important point here with fixed broadband providers is the following. As you know, many fixed broadband providers are as well providers of pay TV services. These, or in general, they are called walled garden services. These services, they don't use the open internet to be transmitted, to be distributed. They use their own dedicated parts of the network. These so-called walled garden or pay TV services, which you pay exclusively for an exclusive quality for that transmission, should be excluded from the fixed broadband internet traffic. Because, as the title says, it's fixed broadband, yes, but it is internet, open internet traffic, based on the best effort principle, the one we are trying to measure. It's not a dedicated line, dedicated quality that an operator may be offering to you in, say, in a pay TV service. Okay? So we have to be a bit careful with this walled garden thing, so not to mix up things, and of course we have to be careful with the wholesale traffic going only among operators in order not to double count the thing at the very end, right? Okay. Well, you know the scale of the numbers, you know, which is 1 exabyte would be 10 to the 9 gigabytes. Or 10 to the 12 megabytes, okay? So the thing is provided in exabytes. Fixed and mobile data traffic, there should not be that difficult to get from the operators. We have the log records from the operators. We have as well interconnection points in many countries where most of the traffic is being distributed among the different networks. And they are usually public internet exchange points. There you have a lot of data of incoming, outgoing traffic from any network to anybody else. So it should not be that difficult to measure. This is a picture of the Portuguese authority, and they have a special application with which they can measure the loading, the peak and off-peak times in the internet traffic, which, by the way, it comes back to a question by Oman on international internet bandwidth, even though this is domestic internet traffic, but of course there is peak and off-peak traffic, okay, of course. Over the day, over the month, over the year, over the term, you know, of course. Well, and this was more or less it. To summarize very briefly, we have been reviewing the supply-side indicators of fixed internet, mobile internet traffic, subscriptions to mobile internet, subscriptions to fixed broadband by speed tiers, The 3 speed tiers are going to be used for the IDI. Additional speed tiers are going to be asked by the ITU and being collected. We have reviewed as well the international internet bandwidth indicator. And as far as I know, these are the most important, let me just review it. These are the most important IDI supply side, let me insist on this, indicators, which, let me show you the table so that we don't get confused. Yeah, here we go. This is the whole IDI. In green, the new indicators. Most of them are supply side, but not all of them. The new indicators that have been approved 1.5 years ago to be introduced in the IDI, which is, you can see, is population covered by at least a 3G mobile network, or it might be a 4G, fixed broadband subscriptions by speed tiers, only 3 speed tiers, mobile broadband internet traffic, fixed broadband internet traffic, and then the rest are demand-side indicators, which I will not get into now. So we have still time for questions, comments, experience sharing, problems that you face, anything. Please, Safa.
Thank you, Professor Inigo, for this wonderful presentation. First, my question will be related to the active mobile broadband subscriptions, and its 2 indicators which has been facing a lot of challenges during the last years, okay? And because it's changing a lot with the technologies and so on. So why not to make the first one as bundles, which is voice and data, and agglomerated with the bundles indicator, and then the one of the standalone, it would be data only. I guess it will reflect more what is happening in the market in all of the countries of the world, because I don't know if the definition says that it's data and voice on the same terminal, on the same device, as well as an add-on service. So our countries, they have this option as an add-on service, and can operators understand those definitions and reply adequately to the definition, or it's better to make it bundles, which is voice and data, as simple as that, and call it bundle, and then make a second indicator, which is data only, and this would be, I don't know, I need your advice on this.
This, I remember, this was a discussion, I think it took place 2 years ago, and it was in order to get closer, the definition that we had in the ITU of mobile broadband, to get closer with the OECD and with other European Commission and other stuff. You are right. Look, I only want you guys to look at the data and voice standard were called before broadband definitions. One typical thing, the most frequent plan is the one that Safa, that you mentioned, which is usually people, and you tell me your experience, guys, usually people buy it in a bundle, voice together with data as a subscription. Be it in contract, be it in prepayment mode, I don't care. Usually this is 90%, I'm sure, of the plans. But it may be that in my terminal I only have voice, and I suddenly want a contract-based 1 GB data connection to be used in my smartphone. Before, we were counting it as a separate thing, but now we decided 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we decided to put it, well, this is a standard, this is an active-based handset mobile subscription, because I'm going to be using with my smartphone. And usually it is bundled, even though in some cases it may be not.
Don't you think that the add-on service in itself, it can be data only? I mean,
yes, of course,
yes.
Of course.
So there will be double counting between the 2 indicators, especially that they are a sum up and called active mobile broadband, which is 1 indicator. Because in my country, I find, especially with those indicators, through the past 10 years, there is really a problem of the changing of the technologies and the offer in the market and the different packages. So it's a hard indicator for the operators to grasp. They are asking, what about the add-on? And if there is an add-on, the add-on in itself is a standalone package. It's a so it can be in the second category or the second indicator, which is data only. I don't know.
Yeah, but let me insist, it should not, based on the definition, in the sense that if the add-on plan is going to be used together with your voice plan from a smartphone, then it should be counted as standard, data and voice, even though it might have been contracted in a separate way. Well, okay, fine. But the thing is, if I contract a plan with my provider and I only have voice, if I contract now a data plan, they will stick it to my SIM card. Hence, I only have one, how can I say, I have 2 contracts, yes, correct, but I only have one terminal from where I'm using my voice or my data connection. Whereas the rest is just to distinguish the fact that you may be using other terminals, like tablets, very especially, because data cards are on less demand over time. Tablets, that they have the possibility to subscribe to a data, only data, of course, subscription, and of course they should be counted off as mobile broadband.
My final comment on this, that nowadays in the market there is the dongles and the USBs, they are not really that popular anymore. So, and data only, it's became data cards. You put the data cards, it's not really related to the device. I don't know what is happening in the rest of the world, but this is the case in Egypt. So that's why the operators, they do not really grasp the idea of the device. It's not device, it's bundle versus...
No bundle.
Yeah. So I don't know about other countries.
Yeah. Yeah. Anybody free really to jump in to see, please.
Thank you very much. One question, you talked a lot on the access and a lot on the use. And when we talk about the access, we understand that it should be divided by fixed and by mobile broadband, because we are talking about speed tiers, like you said. But when we talk about the traffic in use, what's the actual reason to divide between fixed and mobile broadband traffic? Because in the process of use, is it matter what type of broadband actual consumer will consume? I'm sorry for duplication of wording, because they spend traffic, they use traffic. Why we use 2 times on the traffic and increase the weight of the traffic things for second thing on ICT use? Thank you very much.
Yeah, good question. We don't know, probably in the future this distinction will make no sense, but for today, and you will tell me about your experience and the fact that you know, mobile networks, mobile broadband, offers you the possibility of being anywhere, being on mobility, something that fixed broadband does not allow you to. And this mobility thing, first of all, we are all paying for it, because it's not the same cost. The thing that I'm paying for mobile broadband is the cost that I'm paying for fixed broadband, by the way, not per gigabyte, nor per megabyte, nor per any kind of measure. So it is charged differently. And the networks underlying, they are, in the last mile, they are different. It is different to have a fixed network in the last line that is fiber-based than to have a cell where I'm depending on how many guys are on the same time simultaneously enjoying broadband. You are right if you go towards the trunk part of the network, because there is all fixed, most probably. But the last mile, is, at least for now, who knows in the future, there's still a distinction between a mobile network where you usually share it with other people and a fixed network where you have a dedicated line for yourself alone, right? So in the future, it may be very relevant, really, what you say. Please.
Thank you. This is a clear explanation, of course, but that doesn't solve the question. Why, for example, you thought that mobile broadband provides better opportunity because you can use your traffic anywhere. Fixed, not. But in the methodologies, you have the equal weight for fixed and mobile, while mobile has a lot more opportunity, and in my understanding, it should be more weighty. Why it's equal in that case? Thank you.
Yeah, only one thing. It's true that mobile has much more importance if we look at it in many, many countries, probably worldwide. But it is not the same volumes. Fixed broadband is carry on. Excuse me, I had some figures there, but they don't show up. But I promise I had in the slide some figures of how much, on average, each country has on mobile broadband traffic and on fixed broadband traffic. And they are order of magnitudes different. Fixed broadband traffic is much bigger today than mobile broadband in any country, really, that you can imagine. So there you may have like a contrary weighting effect to what you are mentioning. You know, if mobile is more attractive and gives more value to the society, yes, but on the other hand, it is consuming much less volume than fixed broadband. And in a way, you equilibrate, you balance, I don't know, somehow, you know. But it is true that, well, they all have the same weight, and they are both important for any development index. You know, it's very difficult to talk about weights here, right? Because there are things going in one direction and the other at the same time. But your point is interesting in the sense that, you know, why differentiate? Yeah. Thank you. Any further question, please? Yes, please.
Thank you. Just a question regarding the mobile broadband subscriptions. First of all, I do agree with my colleague from Egypt that this is one of the most, I would say, complicated indicators when it comes to the operators. I mean, we've been sitting with the operators for the past period just to check with them what are their concerns about this indicator, and two main issues are arising on the top of the table, which are the first is the when to consider the active definition. I mean, when do we need to consider the activity of the last 3 months? Is it only related to the prepaid type of subscriptions, or no, it is related to all kind of, you know, data usage, whether it is postpaid or prepaid? The second one is that there are some ambiguity about the there's some ambiguity about the the pay-as-you-go concept. So I first subscribed to a voice-only plan, and then at a certain point of time, I just, you know, upgrade, or I use the internet on a pay-as-you-go basis. So where do we report this?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, on the first question which is, on the activity criterion, maybe I wasn't clear enough. It applies only to the prepayment modality. Only. You know, if you contract something on a contract based, and you're going to be paying a monthly payment month after month after month, this is considered to be active. Whether you use it or not, we don't care. This is contract based, active always. Prepayment, you have to abide to the 3 months activity criteria. The pay-as-you-go, as you think, I think they should be treated the same way as prepayment. If you have been using in the last 3 months as a pay-as-you-go mobile broadband, then you should, because I would like to extend the thing, because I know that a number of countries did not report the fixed broadband traffic indicator. And I wonder why. Because in principle, from what I'm aware of, should not be that complex. So if you have any trouble with the definition, with the wholesale thing, with the walled garden, pay TV services, you let us know, because really we don't know, as you very well said, Safa, we don't know what the problem is. In those of you that did not report it, of course. Besides, as you know, there are other reports by independent firms or by commercial firms like Cisco and others, Ericsson, who are reporting measurements on total internet traffic by regions, sometimes by countries as well. So it should not be that difficult to get at least an approximation for any country, a domestic country. And if there are problems, please do tell us somehow. Yeah, thank you. Any further questions? Yep.
Just small question. Are we going to have another session for the demand side indicators similar to this?
I think so that there will be, let me...
Можно здесь тут по широкополосному доступу один вопрос обсудить? Что такое широкополосный доступ, мы разобрались. Если скорость передачи более 256 килобит в секунду, мы считаем широкополосный доступ. До недавнего времени ITU не имел концепцию, значит, the Next Generation Network. Он несколько лет тому назад объявил эту концепцию, и во всем мире идет, значит, мощная тенденция перехода к единой сети, которая называется мультимедийная сеть связи. И в этой сети доступ единый. Потребитель услуг абонент, и он имеет доступ. И здесь ничего не говорится, что это мобильный доступ, проводной доступ или какой-то другой доступ. Может быть, надо идти по этому пути. Раз абонент имеет доступ к сети, ясно, что он будет, значит, требовать услуги. И телефонные услуги, и передача данных, и видеоуслуги. Все, любые услуги, которые может дать эта сеть, он их будет, значит, требовать. Может пойти по этому пути? Конечно, это будет непросто, наверное, но это было бы правильно. Спасибо.
Excuse me, we can see this trend of convergence among operators in offering different type of accesses at the same time to the individuals, right? What I would, and this may be a big reality, what you are mentioning in when we talk about the Internet of Things, and when it develops, right? But I would say, for now, being maybe a bit conservative, right, it is true that at least 99.5% of the accesses, when a subscriber contracts them, he knows whether it is fixed or it is mobile. Actually, you pay pretty different prices for each. And you have very different modalities in it. But you know, you can distinguish, even though the contracts themselves are offered by integrated operators all over the world, because the integration of operators is really worldwide happening. Hence, for practical reasons, for measurement reasons, and statistical reasons, I would keep this distinction between a mobile access and a fixed access for now, because it is lively, it is clear. It may be that the trend is towards combining them and being undistinguishable, yes. But so far, I am not aware of any huge commercial practice anywhere in the world where you cannot distinguish at all between the fixed or the mobile type of access that you are contracting. So for practical reasons, I would say, keep in mind the evolution, of course, by all means, but you know, we can still keep this distinction because it's useful for measurement. Thank you. Any further questions? Well, if not, let me thank you for this very lively discussion and for your participation, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you very much, Inigo. This was really a lively discussion. So we're coming to the end of day one, official part. I mean, like working part. So it's my honor also to invite you all to the reception, which will be hosted by the ministry. It starts at 7 p.m., but we have to drive, I think from here it's like 20 minutes drive probably. So we are all invited to be in the lobby of this hotel at 6:30. At 6:30. Пожалуйста, всех позвольте тоже пригласить на прием от имени министерства, который в 7 часов начнется в ресторане Каночча. И в 6:30, пожалуйста, все, кто поедет, спуститесь вниз в лобби гостиницы, в которой мы проводим семинар, и будет автобус, который всех нас доставит. Спасибо.